This podcast is brought to you by Optimizer's Mass Zines product. Watch the video at the end of the podcast for more details.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show. I'd like to thank J23 for the intro music. You can find a link to her music in the show description. My guest today is Norman Wolfe. Norman is founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders and creator of the Living Organization, a framework that replaces machine thinking with a leadership model grounded in how organizations actually work. A former Hewlett-Packard executive who led a $1.2 billion turnaround, Norman has spent over 4 decades helping CEOs close the gap between strategy and execution by aligning what people do, how they relate, and what they believe. Norman, welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
Thank you, Deepak. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you having me as a guest.
Oh, pleasure is all mine. I like to start off these episodes with kind of just take us how you got to where you're at now, or maybe how you got to that pivotal point. And feel free to go as far back as you want. You're going to go back to childhood or just that, that one pivotal moment that made all the change go forward. I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I will go back a little bit to my very early days of my career when I first left university, all full of excitement, and joined Pratt & Whitney Aircraft as a young engineer, computer scientist, and even though we didn't call them computer scientists back then, I'll tell you how long ago that was. Anyway, I remember coming into work about 3 months or so into the job. I remember my supervisor saying to one of the other employees, when you come to work, you leave your personal life at the door. Huh. What part of me do I leave at the door? How do I disassociate? And then a few months after that, 3 of us who were working together, part of a team, were talking about how much fun we had and loved that job and how exciting it was and stimulating the work we got to do. And the same supervisor walks in, overhears us, and after a few minutes goes, "Work is not meant to be fun. Work is work. If this was fun, you'd be paying us like Disneyland," and walked out. And I'm going, huh? The reason I mentioned that is, while that wasn't necessarily the pivotal point that got me to where I am, it laid a foundation of curiosity. Why do businesses treat people or treat work that way? Fast forward, this was back in 1969, 70. Fast forward to 2002, after 2002, about 14, 15 years in consulting at that time. And I was wanting to reorganize or refocus my consulting business into, I've been doing lots of different things for a lot of different companies over the years. And I felt like I should bring a real focus to it. So I was talking to a client who I was working with for over a decade. And I asked him, why do you keep hiring me? And he said, "Well, that's easy, Norman. You help me execute faster." I said, "Oh, execute faster. That's my focus." So I began to really look at this whole area of strategy execution. And I came across a number of reports that said the success rate of strategy execution is less than 30%. Over 70%.
I would believe that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And you got to understand, when I heard that, it was in the context of all this knowledge and information we have about how to effectively lead organizations. I mean, from Tom Peters to Jim Collins, Amy Edmond. I mean, the list of material we have about how to lead organizations. And my experience has been CEOs are not stupid people. There had to be something else happening. And that's when it harkened back to some of my early training at HP. One particular training module was with Joe Barker, who talked about paradigms. And how paradigms, the way we see the world, the way we frame our understanding of how the world works, affects everything in our lives and sometimes constrains us. And that's when I realized we were in the paradigm trap. And that was the pivotal moment. It happened in about 2003, 2004. I was talking to somebody at a conference and explaining my thinking. And she asked me, well, what makes you different? How do you think differently? I said, well, I see organizations more as a living entity, as a person, like with a soul and a purpose. And she said the magical words, you should write a book. My first reaction was just that, not me. I'm not an author. I don't know how to write books. But she planted a seed that would not die. And so 6 years later, my first book was published, The Living Organization, where I framed the principles of what if an organization wasn't a machine of production, which is the existing view. If you think about it, the existing view is an organization is like a black box. We take inputs and we want to produce outputs.
Right.
And how things happen inside that black box is designed by the leadership team. The goals, the strategy, how we organize, how we structure ourselves, process improvement, process flows. All of that is the way we assume we get results, how we convert inputs to outputs. But that's not what an organization is. It's based on a lot of my other interests in life, from psychology to spirituality to human motivation and everything else I've learned over the years. An organization is actually any collective of people that come together for a common purpose actually creates another living entity. You can think of it as an umbrella collective force that guides these people to behave a certain way. And you see it all the time. People talk about, even in their own companies, they talk about my sales department has this kind of personality, and my engineering department is different, and my finance department is conservative, and they talk in human terms like it's a person.
Right.
And so I said, well, why not? What if we thought of it as a person? Everything shifts when that happens. Everything changes. The role of leadership, what we're trying to accomplish, how we go about accomplishing it. It's like we uncover the reality of what we're managing instead of trying to make it something it's not. Um, and so that's the background for the Living
Yeah.
Organization
Yeah.
framework.
So Norman, that brings up the question then, when the leadership team with, strategy help from someone like yourself or otherwise, when they begin to lead an organization like a living entity, what changes? How
It's
does
a
the
great
company
question.
mature? How does thinking change? That sort of thing.
Well, first of all, you just threw in a key word. How does a company mature? When you think of an organization as machine, the concept of maturity doesn't enter into the equation. Maturity only relates to a person. So even the fact that you brought up that question in that way indicates the sort of unconscious way that we understand what an organization really is. And that becomes a key thing. So in the traditional model, people of the organization, we call them our most important asset. We call them the most critical stakeholder. But that's a bad framing, because that makes them basically a component part. An asset is a thing. Uh, and most important stakeholders mean they're not part of the organization. They're a stakeholder to the organization, which means the organization is inherently the leadership team to who the people are a stakeholder.
Right.
Right? But if you think about the way we think about people in the organization, even the way we account for them, they're nothing more than components of the machine. And we want to make those components as efficient as possible. But they're still just, how can they get the results I need? Think about it from a developmental point of view rather than an evaluative point of view. You begin to ask the question, how can I use these challenges we have in achieving our new strategy as the catalyst to develop the people? So now we look at the strategy, we look at not how can the people get the results, but how can the goals we've set serve as the catalyst for developing the capability and maturity of the people So there's greater capacity to achieve the goals. So that's one of the key changes, which changes the role of leadership. From plan, organize, lead, and control, we want to set the context. Why do we exist, and what are the boundary conditions of this organization? What game are we playing? Right? What's our context? What's the meaning of this whole organization? And what are the rules of the game we allow for this organization? And then we want to focus on the development of the people because that's what increases the capacity of the organization to actually execute. And when you're talking about people, people have a very strong need to belong. So you want to build a sense of community out of the organization. And then, of course, you want to be of service. And being of service to me is delivering on what you promise, which means producing what the organization is meant to produce. So instead of plan, organize, lead, and control, we have set the context, develop people, build community, and be of service. Very different roles, very different orientation. So those are
Do you
some of the
think,
ways it changes.
yeah, Norman, with your, long history in working with large organizations in, let's call it corporate America, corporate world, very ballpark, like how would you say large organizations have done with this transition? Like
Very
you
poorly.
obviously haven't had the chance to put your magic on every single company out there, and there's always new companies. But like, from we go back to like, let's call it this the 70s to now, 2020s, almost soon 2030s. Like, how has the corporation evolved over time?
Well, the corporation is evolving, and I'm thankful for that. And there's a lot of attempts. There's been a lot of different movements out there. Self-managing, self-organizing team movement with folks like holacracy or sociocracy. There's been new models like higher corporations, um, micro enterprises, where they try to create organizations that are entrepreneurial, where there's no more corporate structure, but everybody is focused on being a micro enterprise that serves a customer, and they have what they call zero distance to customer, right? Um, so there's a lot of experimenting going on out there. The challenge is, and and the challenge I took on is all of these efforts fail because they're still operating in the old paradigm. The notion that it's a machine, and we're trying to make a machine dance, if you will. We're trying to make a machine be more responsive and resilient. We're trying to make a machine be more adaptive. These are human attributes, they're not machine attributes. So we have to shift the paradigm. And I'll tell you, shifting the paradigm is not easy. And
I was just gonna say, sorry to interrupt, but like, isn't that really the key? Like shifting the paradigm when you have investors, boards, big hedge funds, et cetera, people that, have invested in or control the company really. Um, and they have a set paradigm that to like break that's the big challenge, right?
that's a huge challenge. It's why I've chosen to work with what you might call the SMB market. The smaller, they're not so heavily invested. They don't have as much at risk. And there's a few companies that take very huge risk. Higher Corporation was one where they completely changed their approach. As a matter of fact, Jean Ruhrmann, uh, I was connected with him, and he read my first book. Um, and he actually wrote the forward to the Chinese translated version of that book, because he recognized what I was talking about was the necessary paradigm shift to make what his vision was all about doable, right? Um, one of the challenges in the current paradigm is this what I call bifurcation between the business side and the people side, and they're separated, right? The leadership team worries about the business side, which is optimizing the machine, and this thing we call people, the unique components, because they're people, not just component, and that's relegated to HR. That's that causes all sorts of problems, needless to say.
Yeah, Norm,
Um,
I'm seeing the parallel here. Like, obviously my background's in the health space, and I see this with my clients who I work with one-on-one, or if I do any corporate thing. almost every, I'd love to get your take on this just generally speaking, but almost every corporation of any size, talks about their people and they're, like you said earlier, they're their biggest asset and this and this and this. But when you actually really boil it down and really strip away all the noise to like what their actual programs are for health or mental health or whatever, it's like they're wholly inadequate for the most part. I know I'm painting with a broad brush here, but that's been my experience is like they give it a lot of lip service, but the actual programs to support their people, their main asset, if you will, is wholly inadequate. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you. And it's because, I mean, think about it. Here I am, a CEO. I've got limited resources. I'm going to do things with those resources that optimize the machine's ability to efficiently produce outcomes. People are not efficient. I mean, they're not easily manageable, fit in a nice logical box. They come with all sorts of challenges, emotions, feelings, personal life, um, and we don't have a good in the traditional view of things. We don't have a good connection between people and results. We know the people are the things that execute, but we don't know how to tie the efforts and resources we put in people to producing the outcomes we need. And because of this bifurcation, the two separate resources, in our approach, we've connected the two. They're not separate anymore. It's an integrated approach to it because it's the recognition that the people aren't the most valuable asset or the most important stakeholder. They're the living cells of the organization. They are the organization. You can take away investors, suppliers, customers, leadership. You can take all those elements away, and you can still have an organization of people committed to a common goal. You take the people away, you can have all the investors, suppliers, and customers, but you don't have a company. It's silly. So in our view, the people are the living cells. So what you're talking about becomes the critical element of how we execute in our paradigm. In the old paradigm, they become a pain in the ass. Pardon my French. They become a nuisance, a difficult thing. Why can't the people just do what we tell them to do? Here's the goals, here's the plan, go execute it. It's that simple. Well, it's not. You're talking about motivation, behavioral considerations. Um, you're talking about what makes people respond to life the way they do, individually and collectively. You're getting into the psychology, even the spirituality aspects of human life. Uh, when I was growing up and learning management, I was taught that the human aspect is the X factor. You know, in an engineering point of view, it's the variable we can't control. We try to minimize it as much
I've
as
heard that
possible.
before.
It's the way it is. That's the old paradigm thinking. We have to shift that if we really want to make a difference. If we really want organizations that can face the complexity and uncertainty of today's world and have those attributes of adaptability and resilience and innovation and creativity, we got to recognize that those attributes are human attributes. And it's not to replace. I'm not big on saying our work is people-centric. It's performance-oriented, but it's the recognition of how do you really create performance-oriented organizations. And it's the people that execute. At the end of the day, you can't get away from that. And so,
Yeah, sorry, finish your thought there, Norm.
yeah. So yeah, what you said is right. The we give a lot of what sounds like lip service. CEOs know how important the people are. In their heart, they know that. But they get measured and rewarded based on performance. And they've been trained to think about performance enhancement based on a paradigm that no longer fits society or the world we live in. So they're struggling. If you look at recent studies, I saw a study once that said 60%, 68% of CEOs today feel extremely stressed and leave work emotionally exhausted.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. I've not seen that same study, but I just see that with my own clients.
Yeah,
Like there was this, and and just going back to what you said earlier, um, I mean, I'd love to. Some I don't know how we do this, but like I'll just use myself again with my clientele. We can measurably show improvement in decision making, reaction time, emotional intelligence, et cetera, by like working on the health aspect, right?
Yes.
My wheelhouse, and even maybe with small teams. But to do that organizationally, to put out those like I've not been part of that yet. I wish I was. Anybody wants that when their company, come reach out to me. But that's obviously very challenging. The larger that organization, the machine, so to speak, becomes, the harder that is because of the personalities, the right, all the gooey human people stuff, right? So
And we also have to recognize our society hasn't helped. If you think about, I mean, no organization, no individual is an island unto themselves, right? We're all embedded in a context of societal context, societal way of thinking and operating. You pointed the investors have a certain way of thinking, government regulations has a certain way of thinking, um, even our education system. From our education system was really designed to meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution, which meant we wanted to train people to be good employees, which in the old paradigm, when this was all created, was based on employees learning how to follow orders and doing what they're told. So you think about the education system. Students learn very quickly. Success comes from satisfying the teacher's needs, and the teachers, I have a niece who's a teacher, and she said, we were taught as educators to follow the models: we teach, you learn, we test, we evaluate.
yeah, yeah.
That's the way we run
Norman,
businesses.
that sentiment is so timely. The time of this recording. Now, just a little sidebar for a second. My oldest daughter, she'll be 15 in a few weeks. Very bright. We're actually in the process of trying to change school systems because she does not feel challenged in her current system, and she
Yeah.
wants to take higher level or program that's just not available, which is, it just is what it is. So it's obviously a long process to do all that. So I hear you. I'm in the middle of that right now.
But this is, conversations I've had with some of my clients, they complain about they want the people to step up, and I said, well, they've never been trained they've never been developed to that. I mean, even the universities. I remember back when I was in university, I used to take classes like philosophy and history and art appreciation, and nowadays it's we as universities want to train people for the skills companies need. So what are we doing even at the university level? Rather than teaching critical thinking and creativity and being human, we're teaching people how to be good components in the machine. And
Yeah,
that's
I would agree with that. I mean, it's been quite a few years since I've been in university, but I would say that model was there. And I think it more so depending what school you're in. Like you're an engineer, I was in finance or like, the business school. And I think some of
very
those
much
types,
in
it's
those.
even more so than maybe say a general or some other departments.
I remember the general manager of HP Labs once gave a presentation that rings so true to me. He said, at HP Labs, we don't really, I don't want engineers that come out of universities who are trained to be engineers. He said, what they learned at the university, at the advanced thinking we have, we're going to make whatever they know obsolete in a few years. I want I want philosophers, I want historians, I want people from the social sciences, from the human sciences. I want people who can
That's very
think.
advanced thinking for
And
that
this
time.
was back in 1979, 1980 timeframe. So yeah, I was absolutely advanced thinking, but it really had a big impression on me and formulated my thinking about what's really important for business. And in today's world, it's obviously we need more of that and less of. So leaders have a real challenge because you can't delegate a responsibility into a void, right? You can't pass on responsibility to people who can't handle it. Yeah, I often correlate our work. I use the metaphor of parenting a lot because the goal is to develop the capability and maturity of the organization. Well, that's what we as parents try to do with our kids. Um, you got a 15-year-old. I'm sure you're right in the midst of helping them through these challenges of growing up and dealing with emotions and dealing with relationships and dealing with
Norman, two
communications.
girls, 15 and 12. I'm getting it all. Trust me.
Well, that's what a leader is really dealing with, and they are ill-equipped with that. And that's why we put together the leadership training programs we put together, specifically geared to help leaders learn these new skills. We call one of our programs Leader as Consultant, and the reason I use that term is because a leader isn't just a coach. The leader has responsibilities to organize and do all the things they used to do. All of that stuff doesn't go away. Excuse me. But on top of that, they have to also know how to coach, how to develop, how to mature their organizations. And that's a skill set they've never been taught. That's always been HR's problem.
Yeah, one thing that always, and we don't have to spend any time on this, but one of the things that kind of always a little bit annoyed me when I was in the corporate world was sometimes people would be promoted strictly based on, well, you've been here the longest, you've been here 20 years, 25 years, and because you get your 3 or 4 or 5%, bonus every year, now you're just the most expensive employee, so we better make you management. And they're not necessarily maybe the most qualified, or they don't have that experience of coaching and bringing up that next generation and fostering their team or the people that they're going to be leading go forward. Let you catch your breath there a second, but any thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you, Deepak, that that is a traditional way of doing it. It's because in the traditional paradigm, as I've been pointing out, skills are dominant, performance is dominant. And so we hire people for their skills, we promote them for their performance and their ability to create results based on their skills. We never ask the question, is the skills that got them there to be this high performing individual the skills they need in this new responsibility? And oftentimes when I hold workshops, I ask the CEOs, what do you look for when you want to promote somebody? And like to replace you, if you're looking for somebody to replace you. And skills are not really high on their list. It's being able to see the big picture. It's being able to embrace change and see it coming. It's the ability to deal with uncertainty. It's the ability to navigate different points of view and find the balance between opposing perspectives. These are maturity skills, and we talked about maturity earlier. These are not skills that make a person that is defined by how well a person has performs. These are skills about character and maturity, not about technical capability. And so you're right. And it's why we have so many problems in businesses and why so many leaders are ineffective in their job or struggle because I was very fortunate in my career. Um, I never ran an organization for which I was the technical expert of. For whatever reason, my career, I was a systems engineering supporting salespeople, and my first management position was district service manager. I knew nothing about fixing computers. And in fact, my first year as a manager, my performance review was unacceptable in every category. But that was a gift because it said if I wanted to be successful, I better learn how to manage people. I wasn't a service guy who could say, hey, I know what you're doing, do it my way. This is how I solve that problem. I couldn't do that. I had to learn a different set of skills, which was very fortunate for me because it made me a very effective leader as I grew. As you pointed out, I headed up a $1.2 billion company or division of the sales region. And I had the skills to take it and turn around a major. And again, I didn't grow up in the administrative organization. I grew up from sales and systems engineering to service, and then into the administrative organization.
I think
Very
a key
different.
point that I want the listeners to get on that, that Norman just said is like an early, challenge, or, if you want to even use the word failure, and the growth and the learning from that led to long-term success. later on. And I think too many, maybe painting with a broad brush here again, but too many younger people, millennials, whatever term you want to use, haven't learned that capacity or that capability to accept challenge or constructive feedback or negative feedback even. Not saying somebody should be blatantly poo-pooed on, but like there is something to learn from challenges, right?
Yeah, well, it's if anybody steps back and thinks about all the moments in their lives where they really grew, it always comes out of the challenges we face, the
No, one
difficulties,
hundred percent, 100%.
and that
Yeah,
never comes from our successes. And if you think about it, the success means I already know how to do something. So where's the learning and growth if I already know how to do it, right?
yeah,
So
very good point.
it's always from the things we don't know, but in a society that honors expertise, as I like to call it, success, and downplays lack of success or failure, we're really setting up us as people to not have what is called Swing said growth mindset, right?
Right.
That there's not that desire to want to learn and grow from our mistakes, and making mistakes is okay because that's how you learn.
Yeah. What
I,
Norman comes to mind here is that, all, there's like literally millions, right, of decisions and inflection points in both of our lives, and the failures and the challenges and the overcomings and the growth that even led us to both be here on Zoom together having this conversation,
yes,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. I can't think of a time in my life. I mean, I've had a lot of joy and a lot of positive experiences, but it's really those difficult moments that stimulated, that, like you said, got me to where I am today. That led me to write the book. And fortunately, I've had some mentors. Like, I mean, that very first time of failure, I had one of my mentors, the general manager of the region, took me to lunch, and he said, Norman, I think it was the Harvard Business School. It might be a different school, but the point is the same. He said, at Harvard Business School, they say go out and fail miserably twice before you're 30, because it's in those moments of failure that you learn the resilience to really grow. One there was a time in my life, probably about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, somebody came up to me and says, Norman, why have you been so successful? What's your key to success? And I said, it's easy. I'm the stupidest person in the room. I know nothing, but that lets me ask a lot of questions. So
I
there's
I,
no
lo-
truth.
I always say this too. Like I have mentors as well. I love being the dumbest person in the room because then I want
Yeah.
some of that magic to dust off onto me, right? So
It's actually what made me a really good consultant, because I go into organizations I know nothing about and I ask questions. And the questions often get the leaders to go, huh, we haven't thought about that.
right,
It's
yeah,
it's when you don't know something that the opportunity for creativity and innovation comes out. When you know something, there's nothing to learn.
yeah, 100%
So
agree. Norman, as we slowly come to a wrap here, I did want to bring up your book because it's come up a couple times here. I see kind of your background there. Now, did I read somewhere there's actually 3 books or there's a trilogy coming, but just the first one is out? Do I have that right?
you've got that right. So I wrote the first book when I was writing it. I was having a conflict with my editor, and about how the book should be structured and oriented. Anyway, I won't go into the whole story, but in the end, he says, "Oh, you're writing a trilogy." And I go, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I think of Star Wars. The first book is the encounter. That's where you become aware of something new. Um, the second book is the journey. That's where, Luke goes to Dagobah, meets Yoda, and becomes a Jedi Knight, gets trained. So the second book is the journey. And then the third book is Luke comes back and saves the world, right? It's the return. And it follows the hero's journey. It follows,
Right,
And so when I was writing the book, it was like, to get it focused, I followed that trilogy model. So the first book was published in 2011, and it's the expression of this paradigm shift, the principles, excuse me, that let people know that there's a different way to think of an organization. I think of it as a living entity, as a person. The second book is should be out, I hope, by June or July of this year. I'm still trying to get a date from the publisher. And that has to do with the skills needed for a leader to lead a living organization. In fact, that's the title of it, Leading the Living Organization. And it's actually it was very fun for me and my wife. We wrote it together. My wife's a wonderful creative side. I'm a very analytical, philosophical side. So it's a wonderful balance we bring to it. And it's written as a parable. We got a CEO. Her name is Catherine. She's struggling. She's introduced to a consultant. His name is Merlin. And the whole book is about Merlin and Catherine going through this. What is an organization? Why does it struggle? How do I, as a leader, learn how to resolve it? What skills do I need? And it's a wonderful story. And the
And
third book,
when's the third book going to come out then?
well, we're just starting to write the third book now.
Got it.
So I hope to have it out in a couple of years.
Okay. So just for all the listeners as well, we'll have a link to the book, to the first book, and all of Norman's, website and social media and all that time. So you can look it up. Definitely go check out the book, especially if this is an area of interest to you. Yeah. So Norman, I'd like to maybe leave the audience with, what is your, I'll give you two questions. You can decide which one you want to answer. What is something that you wish you would have started earlier, or maybe like told, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self something? That's one question. Or even just maybe like, what's words of wisdom that you would love to leave the audience with today?
I think the answer probably applies to both questions. What would I tell myself, and what would I like to leave the audience? Perhaps the greatest gift I learned and is embedded in the living organization framework is we have lived a life that is way too based on logic and rationality, the objective world, as you might call it. And we've downplayed or even in some cases demonized the subjective world, the world of intuition, insight, imagination. And our work is about what I call the head and the heart. And a key new skill for leaders, and one that has made a huge difference in my life, and I wish I had learned it earlier, is the balance of the head and the heart. To learn to bring the objective and subjective together, because they both have tremendous value. And so that'd be.
I love that answer. It's not the first time that's come up on the show, and regardless of the person's background. I will say though, if memory serves, and the editors can fact check on this, if memory serves, you were the first person who brought up Star Wars as a reference in the like 75 episodes or so that we've done. So I love it. I'm a Star Wars guy myself, so I appreciate that, Norman. Norman, I want to thank you. This was a very wonderful conversation. I appreciate you for being on the show. Remember, everyone, we'll have the links in the show notes for where you can purchase Norman's book, connect with him. Maybe you're a CEO listening, or of a medium-sized company, and you want to maybe hire Norman for consulting. We'll have all the links there in the show notes. In a second, I'm going to throw it back to J23, who's going to guide us out with some music. Remember, don't forget to check out today's show sponsor. They'll be at the end of this episode. And again, I just want to thank not only you, Norman, for being on, but everyone for listening to the Deepak Saini Show. And remember, exceptional results for the exceptional you. Until next time. Thank you, Norman. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Deepak. It's really pleasureful. Appreciate it.
Today's podcast sponsor is Bioptimizers, particularly their Mass Zymes product here. I use this every time I have a protein-rich meal or a dairy-rich meal. It's a digestive enzyme product that helps break down proteins from meat and eggs, etc. You're having that big steak, and also dairy products. You're having the cheese, etc. So I'm very sensitive to these dairy products, particularly some of the enzymes in that. So it helps me break it down so my body can actually use it, and helps break down that yummy steak or ribs or chicken or whatever I'm having, so I can actually use the amino acids from that and help digest that food. So Bioptimizers has like 80 products in their line. I'm just talking about one here of Enzymes. There's Gluten Guardian, which I've talked about before if you're sensitive to gluten. They have nootropics, and they also have my favorite brand of Magnesium Breakthrough, that has all 7 forms of magnesium. And I'll talk about that another time. But Enzymes, if you eat meat and you want to get more from your meat, make sure you're digesting it properly and actually get the benefits you want, get those amino acids, then you definitely want to check out Enzymes.
Podcast produced by the Minted Green Company